Hello, good evening, and welcome to African Voices platform. My name is Baile Jallo, coming to you live from our Sheffield Live studio, and my colleague Kiwe Chihana, who is broadcasting from a mini studio at home due to the heavy snowfall in Sheffield and other parts of the city.
Thank you so much, Bailo. I'm really delighted to have Rodney Sieh, founder and editor of Frontpage Africa, joining us tonight. Now, Rodney is an acclaimed Liberian author and writer. Previously published a book that was called Journalist on Trial, Fighting Corruption, Media Muzzling, and a 5,000-year prison sentence in Liberia. Today, Rodney joins us to talk about his new book, which is launching this Saturday. It's called The Unofficial Biography of President George Weah, Africa's Footballer President. Good evening.
Good evening, Bella, and good evening, Chewe. It's good to be here again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. I missed you the first time, so I'm really honored to have you today. So it's good that I can talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Now, Rodney, you're the founder and editor of Frontpage Africa, but you've got quite a plethora of accolades to your name, including being recognized by some quarters as a hero of the fight against corruption, be it in Liberia or the West African region. Now, I wanted us to get into before I introduce your book, I wanted to get a bit of a feel of who you are, what drives you, and how did you get to being this person that is considered to be a fighter of corruption in the region?
Well, I started my career before I even became a teenager. I used to sell newspapers as a news vendor, and my great-grand-uncle Albert Port was also a freedom fighter in Liberia, and a journalist and a pamphleteer. And my uncle Kenneth Best was also a journalist. And so it runs in the family. So I used them as a model for my success, for my work. And that has led me to some of the challenges I face and prepare me for life, what's happening now.
Right. And I think it would be remiss of me not to mention that apart from having all these accolades, you've had some challenging times with this. And so we're going to be getting a bit more into that as we go on. But I'm really delighted to be talking to you about the book you'll be launching tomorrow in London. And this is the unofficial biography of George Weah, that's Africa's footballer president.
Right.
How did you come to this?
Well, a few years ago, I think it was about 5 years ago, I was having lunch with a colleague, Helen Cooper from the New York Times, and she suggested to me, because she had written a book about former President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and she said, you should be the one to do this book about George Weah, because you're in Liberia, you covered him for years, and I think you'd be the best person to write a story. So first of all, I sent him a text message. I asked him, I want to tell you a story, can you be available for interviews? And he said he wasn't ready to tell the story. And so that's the unofficial biography. He did not approve the work. But I did manage to interview about 150 people, friends, colleagues, did a lot of research about the subject. And so it was very, very intriguing, very, very revealing things that I discovered during the process of writing this book. And so I think what we have now is a complete project. Despite he didn't get the authorization, I think I managed to find a lot of things that people will be looking forward to read about it.
Right, lovely.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Bailo, that when I was reading a bit of background on this book, a few things that Rodney has said in the recent few days. He said himself that he's equally excited to be reading this book. So I would like you to get into a bit of that, Bailo, with him as well.
Yes, indeed. And to be honest, myself, I've read the book. I haven't managed to read everything in the book because the book consists of 27 chapters, and there is a lot to read about in the book, but I've managed to read some chapters, especially, the first chapter, where the prophecy chapter, where it speaks about George Weah from the slum, George Weah that nobody knew from Morovia, to the George Weah, the legend footballer that has performed the African miracle that nobody has kind of like repeated up to date. you know. But I'm just wondering, Rodney, if you could share this. In your opinion, why do you think George Weah did not approve this? And also, in terms of that chapter itself, you know, you've got 27 chapters, including that prophecy, and also some of the chapters that which we will come into details later was, how did you put all this context together and began where you began?
Well, you know, a lot of the footballers or athletes who play this game are very, they see themselves as celebrities, so they don't like to be interviewed for stories. And so it's very challenging, you know, trying to get him to talk about it. And he wasn't available to talk because I think he was afraid that he may, you know, be revealing something that he don't want people to know about. And I think he was afraid that as a journalist like me who was very experienced and who's been through the trenches, he wasn't comfortable sharing with me some of the things that happened to him in the past. But nevertheless, I managed to discover an old man called Old Man Kamara. He was one of the first people who recruited George Weah to play football. And that's the prophecy. This old man was something like a medicine man, you call him, back in the day. And so he was someone who was highly respected in the team that George Weah played for, Invincible 11. And he took George Weah to the coaches and said, look, this is my son, please give him a shot in the team. And that's how George began to play. He didn't stop there. He also went to next to Guinea and found a coach called Sitoli. And Sitoli was the one who molded George into the player that he became before he was scouted to go to Europe.
Yeah, and you also explained from Guinea to how he went to Cameroon, and where Arsene Wenger took like a private jet just to come and see him, and the coach that had George Weah then, where he explained to Wenger, look, this is a kid that if you take him to Europe, you wouldn't regret. And Arsene Wenger himself kind of like took his own time to come to Cameroon just to see George Weah. And at the time as well, even though at the time we didn't have like what we've got now, smartphones or television, but Liberia followed George Weah wherever he went.
Yeah, I think what made him unique was the fact that he was very talented, but he was raw. He needed to be polished before he was unleashed to the world. And I think Coach Sitoli was the one who really began the process. And I think that process translated into him going on to Arsene Wenger to Monaco in France. But also, it showed that he was very determined to become a great footballer. And it didn't take long for him to, you know, to gain respect among his peers in Europe. He was scoring goals at will. He was dribbling defenders and all that. So it was very, very a difficult time for him learning to adjust to the European game. But when he finally figured it out, he became an untouchable person.
Interesting. Chiwe?
Yeah, thanks. Very insightful. I'm trying to chronicle, to relate George Weah, the football star, against the person you talk about in the book. And so I thought maybe chapter 7, the letdown, we could talk a little bit about that and maybe draw some parallels. So this is where this self-assured footballer was expecting to carry his team, and you speak to how that did not happen. Mm-hmm. How can you draw parallels with his leadership? What do you think? Is there any relationship there with that characterization and that experience and who he is as a leader?
Well, you know, most of the people I interviewed for this book had similar themes about George Weah. They felt that he was not a strong leader. They felt that he was very petty. He held grudges against people. And I think those qualities helped define some of the negativity you heard about George Weah in the past and in the present. People feel that he's very intolerant to criticism. And so most of the players he played with, they felt the same way. They felt that he was very unwilling to hear their side of the story, to hear their views on things that were happening. And so that led to the letdown and him qualifying for the World Cup and the African Cup of Nations successes, because he wasn't really favorable to people who had different opinions in the Nostak camp. And so that was very, very problematic for him.
Right. And when you say that, is that that's still very much an opinion based on what you've collected, or is that an opinion that belongs to Rodney, the author?
No, it was opinion based on what the interviews I did with people for this book. There were a lot of players he played with, like James Salins Sadiba, Jonathan Sulby, Danny Nisha Sibwe, and all of those. In fact, there was a crucial game that Liberia had to qualify for the World Cup. They only had a big Ghana Black Stars. And the night before the game, the camp was in disarray. The players were drinking, were partying and all that. So people felt that George should have put a stamp on the team that before that game, and he did not put a stamp on the team. And most of the players I talked to said if he had showed leadership that before that game, Liberia would have beaten Ghana and gone to the World Cup.
And you spoke of that chapter in detail as well, where George was sometimes accused of probably of selling the game. And prior to the game as well, as you mentioned, all of them went to a wedding. Like you said, they were all drinking and that. And that made him really, really angry. And, you know, there was a time where he even wanted to say, look, I hung up my boot for the national team.
Yeah, because those criticism, people said he wasn't a good leader on the team. And there was times that he had to show, you know, to fight for himself, because when the team failed to qualify for the World Cup, people came after him with a vengeance. They felt that the game was sold. They felt that he was incompetent as a leader in the team, and they felt that he wasn't really holding the team together. And I think that's some of the things that caused him problems.
Right. When people are thinking about the unofficial biography of George Weah that you have written, I would want to think some of them would be thinking about your fight against corruption, your imprisonment, that history. Is there something they should anticipate in this, maybe related to your? Can you draw parallels with your corruption fight with the George Weah regime? And is there anything in this book that people can seek to find that relates to that?
A lot of things in the book that relates to that, because, for instance, President Joe Biden has been very critical of the government. His government has been very critical of Liberian government of Weah. And one of the reasons was that there were just too many of Weah's cronies or officials of government who were not performing, who were corrupt, engaged in alleged corruption. And he wasn't doing anything about it. He's not doing anything about it. So as a result, the U.S. was forced to slap sanctions on 3 of its officials in government. And that was kind of a slap in the face of the government. And it showed that as a leader, as a footballer, he was great. He was very, unstoppable. But as a leader, he's been something else. And that tells you that the people of Liberia are very concerned about what's happening, especially going into elections this year.
Right. And I mean, when we look at these African legends, the football legends, they're almost untouchable. I'm Zambian, so we've had Kalusha Walia, that's a clique of friends, with George Weah, them lot. Is there something about this strongman concept that you think carries over when they go beyond their football careers and when they go into the next? Is there something that we as Africans as well kind of enhance in their lives? Like, are we responsible for who they are and their failures later beyond football?
I mean, like, I wouldn't say Africans, I would say voters in general, because even in the Western countries, people vote wrongly. And in Liberia, the voters got it, people say the voters got it wrong because they elected someone who was incompetent and who was unable to deliver the goods for the country. And so I think it's more like footballers like Dede Drogba, Sami Ito. Now, people are looking at them as, could they be one day consider presidency in their countries, But the way George Weah is performing in his own country, it creates some doubts about whether he can deliver, the other players can deliver for their country. So it's all about how the interpretation is unfolding, how people see George Weah as the leader, how they see him as someone that they can really look up to. And I traveled to a place called Gibraltar in Liberia, in Monrovia, where he grew up. And I interviewed people who grew up, who were there when he was president, he was playing football. And they seeing him for the first time, like, is this someone who grew up with us, who we looked up to as a football to be someone great. But at the same time, look at now where they see things are not going right. They see things are not happening right. So they're questioning whether they made the right choice. That's a problematic thing for him.
Yeah, and you lent your voice to a song. I think I found one where you're singing on the Gibraltar story. Who are the artists, and is that part of the incentive? Like talk us through that one. That was quite interesting to watch.
So the build up to the book release has been very interesting because I tried to give teasers to the readers about what to expect. And the video, I found one of the best producers in Liberia and one of the best reggae artists, Naziman. And I told him I wanted the concept of a song that talks about some things that are in the book, but don't reveal too much. And the song is based on 3 different stanzas. The first one talks about his football career. The second one, and the third one is about his presidency. And so it gives a glimpse of what's in the book, but not in detail. So if you listen to the song, you can see that there are 3 faces of George Weah in that song: the footballer, the president, and the governance issues president. Those are
Yeah, I definitely picked that up. I'm assuming it's probably going to be one of those songs that will play a lot as you get closer to the elections. Yeah. Before I get into the story of his vice president and your previous interview with her, can I just get back to Bailo and the book?
Yeah, sure. Rodney, I just wanted to talk about the chapter 10 on his decision. You also explained in detail on how he came about to make his decision in wanting to get into politics. And he also gave a bit of a teaser about his relationship between him and President Taylor when he was a footballer. I just want you to talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, when he was playing in France, they were concerned that he had some issue with taxes. And although there were a lot of concern that he and Charles Taylor were loggerheads, the book research actually showed that Charles Taylor actually helped him with his tax issue in France. At the time when Mr. Taylor went to meet the French Mitterrand at the time, and the people meet around to help George with the tax issues. And that issue was dealt with. Apparently, to someone who told me from the Charles Taylor camp, that Mr. Taylor actually spoke on behalf of the president, George Weah, the then footballer George Weah, to President Mitterrand regarding George Weah's taxes. It was part of the reason why, in fact, Mr. Weah left Monaco, PSG, to go play in Italy for AC Milan.
Very, very interesting. And will you say here, probably yourself here, being a former correspondent for the BBC and also having the access to work for international organizations, not only being a journalist in Liberia, but that also prepared you to get to access quite a lot of information about him so that you are able to tell this in details?
Yeah, I think when you work as long as I have in this profession, you gain some level of respect from people. And whatever you write or whatever you say, people expect it to be the truth. I know we live in a society, in an era where social media has turned ordinary people to journalists, and they labeling us reports as fake news. But I've built a reputation. I paid a price. I've been to prison twice. And so people look at me as someone who, when I speak, they listen. And I think that is some level of credibility in terms of how this book was written.
Yeah, and in terms of his decision of wanting to join into politics, prior to that, you had met with him in America, and also he had met with so many people that are, very, very influential, Americo-Liberians, and will you say, in terms of his decision of wanting to join into politics, it is George Weah that everybody knows, wanted to be into politics, or it is the circle behind him that pushed George Weah to become the politician he is today?
Well, some of the early chapters in the book details the early beginnings of how this whole thing came together. There were people, some of his friends and peers, who believed that he was popular. He was a populist, and they could persuade him to run for president. And I think that kind of was the driving force behind him coming to the decision. But before he came to the decision, he asked a few people about their inputs. And most people felt that he was not qualified, that he was not ready, that he needed time to groom himself into a leader. And so it took some time, but most importantly, I think it was a matter of people around him who pushed him to run for president. The first time was unsuccessful. The second time, he decided to go as number 2 to someone else. In this case, Winston Tubman, the former presidential candidate. And so it became a matter of how he was going to handle this whole process. And 2017 was the time that everybody felt that maybe it's time to give him a chance.
And you speaking of that time to give him a chance, that was the time as well for him to make the right decision in terms of picking who needed to be next to him.
Yeah, and I think he took the risk because a lot of people felt that he needed someone who could help him get the votes. And it was a controversial decision for him to make in choosing the former First Lady, Joel Howard Taylor, the former wife of President Charles Taylor. And so he made that decision despite the fact that the international community were not happy with the decision, despite the fact that people were concerned that the Charles Taylor label would be on him, and because it's Charles Taylor's wife, he's vice president, he would not win. But he defied the odds, and in the end, it proved to be a good decision for him.
I'll come more into Joel Howard Taylor later, but I guess Chiwe wants to ask another question. Chiwe?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Very insightful. So we're getting into election fever now, and one of the things that you highlighted is this relationship of trust between the media and society. There's been a massive breakdown. All recent reports are showing that. I think that the emergence and growth of social media has definitely contributed to relationships of trust being fraught at the moment. But you are in a position of privilege, I believe, and you're going to be one of those voices, of probably a North Star of what people want to listen to as elections get closer. You've platformed the vice president before. That was interesting to watch. But what do you think you would be leaning towards? What's the political landscape, and where you leaning at the moment, personally?
Well, I try to be, Africa is a very complicated country. In the Western country, it's easy for a newspaper journalist to take sides and decide to support one candidate or other, right? I've tried to be an objective person. Although I may have a personal preference, opinion, but I try to keep it to myself, because once the readers feel that you've taken side in any situation, they begin to question your objectivity. And so that's why I try to be balanced and try to avoid taking sides against anyone in the race.
Okay, neutrality considered and respected at this point. I just wondered what are your hopes for Liberia beyond this election? What would you like to see different? Let's put it that way.
I would like to see a country where corruption is close to non-existent, because you can limit corruption, but you can try to limit corruption. A place where people can live freely, where people can express their views without being attacked. A place where people can have enough resources to send their kids to school. A place where people can have enough resources to feed their families. A place where people can have enough resources to take care of their livelihood and without struggling to do things the way they were supposed to be doing it. And a place just where people can be happy. We live in a continent where people are struggling to live, to eat, to drink, and to support themselves. So if you can have a government that can deliver all those things, then maybe it's time to change. But as it stands now, the opposition in Liberia are not very united. They're fighting among themselves. And as a result, President Weah appears to have the edge at the moment because in the absence of a strong opposition, people, will have easy time making a decision.
Definitely.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Before I bring Bailo back, I wondered whether you could also comment on the region at large. We've just had elections in Nigeria. Any take on that and the role of the media, probably as a function of democracy? I think always the media, in trying to be in aspiring to be objective, one thing that I tend to think we should be doing a lot more of is probably bringing complex issues into ways that people can understand them better. What do you think the media's role has been in the region, in the bloc? Nigerian elections, for example, and now as we're going into Liberian?
The problem is all over Africa, and even in our country, Liberia, I see a lot of journalists on social media defending candidates in election, which is wrong. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing against you supporting someone, but to profess it on social media, I think is wrong. I wouldn't do that. I would advise any journalist not to do that because it puts you in a bad position, and it makes people feel that you're not objective. You're not, you're not someone they can rely on. But if you remain objective, you remain independent, you remain balanced in what you report and what you do, people respect you more. I think it's not fair to the readers to read a newspaper or a radio station that supports one person over the other. It's not fair. I think you maybe if you want to endorse someone, it's your preference. I don't like to do it. I don't think it's the right thing to do. But once you do that, it creates that doubts in the reader's mind. As a result, they go somewhere else to get the news because they don't feel that they can be trusted. So it's a very tricky game. The Nigerian election was very difficult, and it was also marred by a lot of social media activities. People were very expressive about what they wanted to get done and what they wanted to do. And I think there were a lot of supporters on various sides of the aisle. Tinubu had his supporters, Obi had his supporters. And it was like there was this excitement, but there was also individual people and voters showing the rest of the continent that who they wanted to be president. In the end, the irony is that in the end, the opposition didn't hold together and they lost. And now they complain that they were cheated. It's the same thing in Liberia is going to play out again the same way because they're all fighting among themselves. If President Weah is to win the second term, they will claim that they were cheated. It's like the writing's on the wall for them, but they don't see it. They ignore the writings in the wall. And instead of coming together and unseating the incumbent who's been problematic, they fight about themselves. So it's a problem.
Thank you.
George Weah, I just want us to come back again to 2017 on the Joel Taylor issue. He took a lot of time in this book. He explained in detail how long it took him in order for him to choose between the two candidates and in the end settle down with Joel Taylor. And one of the reasons why he, according to the book, why he chose Joel Taylor was for them to work together, and also because Joel Taylor was very popular in one of the counties where she originally came from, or the husband came from. 6 years down the line, how will you describe the marriage? Because upon George Weah, the footballer that many people knew, including myself, this book has kind of like said a lot that I didn't know about George Weah. And George Weah winning the 2017 election was as a result of the youth coming out in numbers to vote for him. Right now, how will you describe George Weah's first time in office, and also the relationship between George Weah and the vice president?
Juha was used as a pawn in this whole process because she was from a vote-rich county. She was married to the former president who was popular in Bond County. So it made it easy for George Weah to win that county. But when the elections were over, when the dust had settled, she became someone else. She wasn't supported. She was ostracized. She was castigated by Weah supporters and his key officials. She was an outsider in the government that didn't want her. It took a lot of pressure from people in the media to write about things that were happening to her before things began to change. But even with that, you can see that she's a very ambitious woman. She's being on the ticket. She's going to be on the ticket for the second term, and it speaks a lot about her intentions. It seems that she's very determined to stay on, to be his presidential, vice presidential candidate, and to maintain power. And so, although she's been through a lot of stuff, a lot of things have been happening to her, it seems that she's still determined to hang on to be the vice president.
And do you see? And sorry to interrupt you there. Do you see the numbers
for the second term for George Weah?
No, I'm just wondering about. Do you see the numbers that came out, the youth numbers that came out in 2017? Do you think George Weah has still got that popularity again?
It's not the same popularity. I think the numbers have dwindled. I think because of the lack of leadership, the lack of good governance, the lack of care for the people has made those numbers decline. The tricky thing here is that a lot of the people who expected him to be a great leader have found out that he has issues, and until those issues are addressed, the youth you talk about will take the support somewhere else. But the lucky thing for we at the moment is that the opposition are struggling. They don't know which way to go. They're fighting among themselves. They can't decide whether to work together or to hang together. They keep thinking that the voters will hate George Weah so much and put them in power, but it doesn't work that way in politics. He has the resources. George Weah has the resources as incumbent, and he can use those resources to beat them. The question is how far they're willing to go to change power, state power.
And prior to him coming to power, George Weah was a very good advocate of press freedom. He used to advocate for press freedom and also advocate about corruption. And yet in this book, you have highlighted a lot which I'm not qualified enough to say he was corrupt, but it has highlighted some sort of corruption scandal, which I believe many readers will find really, really interesting. Many people will see this as kind of like something that came as a surprise to them.
Yeah, I think he was when I was in prison, he came to see me. When I was in the hospital in prison, he came to see me. When I was released from prison, he was there standing by my side as an opposition leader. But when he became president, those things changed. And he wasn't the same person he was before he became president. So it tells you that politicians especially, they use people for their own benefit. And once they get what they want from you, they don't care about you anymore. And that's why I always tell my colleagues in the media that it's good to stand your ground. Don't depend on someone else for your benefit or for your livelihood. I could have easily stayed because Mr. Weah came into my prison and saw me. I would not write anything bad about him anymore. But I couldn't because the way it played out is that he was someone that was involved in politics. And it's in politics, if you do something wrong, you have to report it. But in my case, he sees it as something bad that I'm against him. So thus he wouldn't talk to me about this book that I wrote.
So now I think I've just gained some clarity on a question that I was about to ask you around that. So I think I might have picked up somewhere that there was a suggestion that you may have been friends. So it sounds like it's not a friendship; it's really a case of him coming to be by your side at a time that was challenging for you, and he was using his he was doing it as an opposition party leader, not necessarily that you're friends at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not personal friends with him. Even in 2005, when he was running for president, his people called me to do an interview with him.
Right.
Because at the time, I was still leading people in Liberia, and he wanted my voice. And so I interviewed him for his presidential quest. But somewhere down the line, I think he felt that he was entrapped into the interview. And some of the things that came out of the interview were controversial. I think that from that time, I think we said that there was a distrust between him and I don't trust him, he don't trust me, and so it is what it is.
It is what it is. It is what it is. You can we talk a bit about Front Page News and your journey with that and where it is now? So is that still a publication that's in print since the pandemic? I'm just wondering whether you've had to transition like some of the other publications I work for. We've gone on digital. Where is that?
So I'm the opposite. So I started as an online newspaper, transition to print newspaper.
Yeah.
And the print is still publishing and the online is still publishing. So we're the leading voice of reason in Liberia. We set the pace. We dictate what's going on in the continent, in the region of West Africa. And so we believe that, that's the way to go. For me, it's like, in life we live, it's like you have to be very persistent. You have to be strong about what you believe in. And no matter what people say about you, they might curse you, they might step on you, but you have to show them that you be for real. And that's what I try to do in this life. I try to be different from people. I try to be very, very concise in what I do. And that's the matter I have.
Interesting.
Lovely. So that brings me to the question of your readership. Sorry, Bailo, is there a delay on my part? Apologies
No, go on. Yeah.
Okay, so that brings me to the question of your the readership of Frontpage Africa in relation to, you're launching your book in London. Is that the official big launch, or are you having multiple launches around the continent as well, or elsewhere in the world?
So this is the first launch. I'll be launching it tomorrow, Saturday, at the One Birdcage in Westminster. And then April 1st, I'll be in the US at a place called The Gathering in Washington, D.C. for the US launch. And on April 22nd, I'll be in Liberia for the Liberia launch. And after that, there will be other places I'll be traveling around the world promoting the book.
Lovely, thanks a lot. And that's for online. I bought my copy yesterday, by the way, so I went on Amazon. And is that the exclusive place, or is there anywhere else people are buying the book from if they can't make your launches?
There's Amazon, there's Barnes and Nobles, and hopefully you catch me around the circuits,
Around the circuits, yeah.
I'll be all over the place.
I haven't got a signed copy, so I've bought a copy that's not going to be signed. So I'm hoping that I catch you somewhere. Bailo.
Yes, true. Interesting there. Well, hopefully this the first time when you were launching, or you launched your first book, your Journalist on Trial, you did come to Sheffield. That was the first time of me meeting you. This time it's rather unfortunate that you're not coming to Sheffield. But I'm just wondering.
I wish it wasn't snowing. I would be there.
Yeah, definitely.
You would have come, yeah.
We've got a very large presence of a Liberian community here in Sheffield and other parts of the UK, and likewise in the United States, which is the main hub, which is where I would say in terms of Liberian politics, even this book explains it. That's where everything is decided. I'm just wondering, how has Liberians in the diaspora, I know the launch is tomorrow, how have they received the book?
Well, people are very nervous. Whenever I write something, people are panicking. They think that they don't know what to expect. So people are concerned about what's in the book. Before I left Liberia, I sent a copy to the president's office for him. I was informed that he's received it, so he's probably reading it right now as we speak. And that's the beauty of democracy. That's the beauty of press freedom, You can be in the country, write about a president, and still live in that country. That's what I try to teach my people. Like, you don't have to be enemies with people. You can disagree with them. I can be objective in my writing about them, but I can still live in that country without fear, without favor. I don't care. I'm not afraid of George Weah or his supporters. I wrote a book that I think is objective, it's balanced. This tells about the good, the bad, and the ugly of George Weah, and I'm not afraid to stand by it. I'm so confident in the book that I'm willing to live the rest of my life in Liberia because I believe what I wrote is content. I'm a good place for that book.
And speaking of the ugly, in terms of the FIFA scandal. My personal opinion here, I believe the book revealed a lot, which I believe many Liberians wouldn't be aware of what had happened, then. And it's kind of like you are bringing back memories of what's gone down the lines. You are bringing that back during a time when people will consider it's like election time, which many Liberians or many supporters of George Weah will think you're trying to like pull him down. What would be your response to that?
Well, I heard that. I have that theory. I've heard those speculations, but you see, the former president Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, during her time, there were 2 books written about her. One, her autobiography. Another one written by the New York Times journalist Helen Cooper. I felt that the President George Weah needs a book. And as a journalist, I feel like I was experienced enough to take on this task and go on this journey. And that's what I'm doing. And that's what I did. The process was not easy. It was very rigorous. It was, imagine trying to interview people in a country that don't want to be interviewed, because they're afraid that if they say something against the president, he will go after them. So I took the risk of, doing all of these things and produce what I believe is one of the best books out of Liberia in the last century.
What was that research bit like? You said you at least spoke to a minimum or about 150 people across this time. Did you initially say, did you just out it and say, this is what I'm doing? Or did you initially have a phase where it was just quiet, you're just speaking to people until you say, this is what I've been working on?
My formula for writing this book was simple. I had a lot of people who wanted to talk to me off the record. Don't mention my name. I refused.
Right.
I wanted this book to be as factual as it could be. Everyone in this book agreed to be quoted. They agreed to say, what they believe.
On the record.
On the record. And that, I think, what makes this book very interesting.
And the chapter payback, what do you mean by the chapter payback?
Well, the chapter payback deals with grudges. Other people I spoke to said that the president is someone who keeps grudges against people. When you feel that you're not on the same page with him, or you don't believe in him, he doesn't take you friendly. He considers you to be enemy. And payback is a way, like, now that he's president, all those who doubted him, all those who say he couldn't do it, all those who said he was not qualified to be president, well, I'm president, and I'm going to keep you on track, in check. And that's what that chapter is all about.
You said the research or the book is very objective. In terms of this payback chapter, when people read this, do you think it will bring a light that people don't know about George Weah? For example, people like us, we only knew George Weah growing up, the only African footballer that has won the Ballon d'Or, the best African footballer that the continent has ever produced. But reading this book in just 2 days has made me to know a lot that I didn't know about George Weah. And I'm not from Liberia. I'm from neighboring country, Sierra Leone. But I'm just, as a West African, that chapter payback, do you think it says a lot about George Weah than what people think he is?
I mean, I think I cannot write a book that's all flattery. If I write a book that's just praise singing George Weah, I'll be doing a disservice to Africa. I'll be doing a disservice to the continent and to Liberia, because if it's a footballer story alone, I could flatter him all day and people say, oh, hallelujah, but he became a president for a country. Under his reign, a lot of things have been happening that are not good. And why are those things happening? I have to go deep into why it happened in the past. and why it's happening now. What led him to think that way about people? These are things
Yeah.
people need to know about the story. And that's why I think I had to be objective, had to be honest with myself as a writer, as a journalist, to tell the story, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
And I proper think that's always the best way to do it, especially if you're documenting people who've assumed positions of power. And this is why you find that people who are not Africans start to document our history in ways that are probably not palatable. And so I think it's commendable, Rodney, that you're doing that part of this. This becomes an archive part of our history, and we're documenting it. So thanks a lot for that.
Mm. Let's talk about Liberia in general. As I stated earlier, being from Sierra Leone, I know quite a bit about Liberia. Prior to George Weah coming, lots of us had hope. Of when he becomes a president, a lot will change. You mentioned earlier the speculations of Didier Drogba and the speculation of Samuel Eto'o, and in Sierra Leone there was similar stories like talking of Mohamed Kalon. But in terms of what has happened in Liberia in the last 2 years, for example, in the last few months, there was shortage of rice, shortage, which rice is the most staple food in the country. Do you think this has kind of like shut the doors for other athletes to switch from being athletes into politics?
I think if you were to ask people in Ghana whether they thought Asamoah Gyan or Apedi Pele or some of the biggest stars out of Ghana could be president in that country, based on what they see in Liberia, I don't think they would be happy. If you were to go to Ivory Coast and ask about Didier Drogba and whether he should be president in that country, that's all he's done for them. I don't think you have a good answer from people based on what they see in Liberia. If you were to go to Cameroon and ask people, should Samuel Eto'o be president in that country, I don't think you will have a good answer because of what happened in Liberia. If you were to go to Togo and ask about Emmanuel Adebayo and ask them, do you think he's a good president material? I don't think you would have a good answer. You go to Egypt, can Mo Salah be a president in Egypt? I don't think we have a good answer because of what happened in Liberia. So it's
but the slogan was, for example, prior to George Weah becoming a president, there was this allegation of him being uneducated, and his slogan was, "We've been ruled all these years by these educated people, and nothing has changed." George, and George Weah coming here, do you think he will be able to change things quickly, just in 6 years' time, when things have been there for centuries?
I think George Weah is not hidden the fact that he's not educated, that he's posted about it. He said, I'm not educated, I agree, I'm not educated, but I became president. But I think it's not so much about education, it's about how you translate the voters' mandate into something concrete for the country. I think that's where he's falling short as a leader, as a ruler, of a country. I think that's where people are beginning to question whether he can deliver. I think it's the problem of Liberians willing to decide their fate, but how far are they willing to go to decide that fate?
And will you say his failure is due to lack of political experience?
Lack of political will is more than experience, because if you don't have the will to fight corruption, if you don't have the will to put a foot down on bad governance, if you don't have the political will to dismiss your people in the government who are stealing from the people that voted for you, then you have a problem. And I think that's where the problem lies for George Weah.
And you absolutely need to have him committing to a life of service the minute you step up into politics. So it is a life of servitude, I guess. Yeah, in that sense.
Yeah, because you were elected by the people to lead, to set an example. And so if you cannot deliver what you promise, if you cannot deliver on what you profess to do, if you cannot deliver on the mandate that was given you, your inauguration speech, you said you will have a zero tolerance on corruption. Corruption is has become a vampire, according to some people who's critics, you know. You cannot, you said Liberia is going to be open for everybody to invest, but the investment climate is only for a few people. Those are issues that are hurting the country, and those are issues that the president is struggling to defend as a leader. And those are issues the book dwells on, and those are the issues the book is trying to address as a footballer president.
Amongst the previous leaders, and I realize now we should really be closing this in a moment, but amongst previous leaders, I'm looking at Sirleaf Johnson and Charles Taylor. Which one of those is featured quite a bit in your book, and what's the context?
Madam Sirleaf, because people believe that she delivered George Weah the presidency. She did not support her own president, her own vice president, Joe Boakai. She supported George Weah. Charles Taylor, because of the history of dictatorship and how Liberia has a circle of unending kleptocracy or ineptitude, corruption, and greed. And Talbot, the previous president who died in a military coup in 1980. The history of those people kind of draw Liberia into a full circle, because it's a country where year after year, government after government, the same mistakes are being made. And leaders come and go, and they refuse to change, to make a change in this thing. So I think it's something that people have to begin to think seriously about the direction this country must be going to, because if you keep making the same mistakes, nothing will change in this country.
And how will you describe the political landscape in Liberia between the indigenous citizens and those that are dubbed as Americo-Liberians, or in another word, the Congo people?
I think Liberia is cursed. I think for more than a century, the country was governed by so-called Americo-Liberians. The ethnic majority, or ethnic minority, what we call them, they sat by for more than 100 years and watched the so-called Americo-Liberians dominate them. And I think the coup in 1980 was a revolution that showed that they were fed up. And so that's why it's very difficult for anyone without an ethnic background to really win election in Liberia. And I think the ethnic people feel that it's too early to give them power back. That's why you see, even without the problems in Liberia with George Weah, people are still looking at it as the means of that, you know, the Congo people or the American-Liberian people ruled this country all this time, and they did nothing. And so, well, George Weah is here, he's an ethnic, but the bottom line is the entire legislature in Liberia, there's not one American-Liberian in that legislature.
Wow.
The sad reality is that things have not changed. The president is ethnic. The vice president is ethnic. The Speaker of the House is ethnic. The head of the Senate is ethnic. The entire Senate and legislature, all ethnic.
So basically what was blamed on the Americo-Liberians, ethnic indigenous citizens have come into power now, but nothing has changed.
Nothing has changed. So it tells you the problem was not really the ethnics, all the Americo-Liberians. It was the fact that certain sector of Liberians are just greedy.
Okay, we've got less than 5 minutes. I just wanted us to jump into the ECOWAS region quickly before we finish off, because I know you've got that experience. You've worked in the Gambia before, and Sierra Leone being a neighboring country, Guinea as well. I'm just wondering, what's your take on the ECOWAS region at the minute? Looking at Guinea, there was a coup d'etat. Mali, you've seen a coup d'etat. Burkina Faso, and it looks like, you know, now it's becoming a normal thing in the ECOWAS region.
I remember in 1994, I was in the Gambia, and I went to Sierra Leone to cover a cricket tournament. And at the time, it was Valentine Strasser was president, head of state.
Yeah. 1992,
I was
1994.
in the Independence Stadium. The Independence Stadium, they call it, right?
The Sheikh Stephen Stadium now.
Stadium.
Yeah.
And I saw Strasser sitting in a chair, and the little boy must have been about maybe
28.
7 years old,
Yeah.
standing by me. And I took that picture. And I came back to Banjul in Gambia, and I wrote a story about how the child soldiers were being, surrounded by surrounding the president. And then I look back at that picture and that image, and I see a continent or region that is still, infested with corruption, with greed and nepotism. And it seems that the more things change, the more they remain the same. And so a lot of things are happening in the region. We have elections in Nigeria already. We have Liberia coming up. A lot of countries are having elections.
And Sierra Leone coming up in June as well, June 23rd.
Yeah. So are voters really making the right choices? Are they going to put people in the power who well deserve to be in power? Or are they going to keep fighting among themselves and putting the wrong people into power? So that's why I think it's important that voters in the West African region think carefully before they vote. That's the only way this country the continent will change, the region will change, because we keep making the same mistakes every year, every day, every hour, because of our own selfish interests. Most of the voters in Africa, they vote on one ground. Never mind what you hear about in the streets about, oh, we're suffering. They only vote because of their personal interests. The relatives of people in power, the brothers, the sisters, the aunt, the mother, the father, they all vote for people who they think if they win, they'll get them a job, they'll give them food, they'll give them money. They don't look at who will change the country. And that's how this country, this continent, and this region has been struggling for so long, because the voters don't make the right decisions.
I think this is part of why I was thinking maybe we need to step up as the media as well. I think without being biased towards any political parties, but I do think that the media has got a democratic function that it can really play to in terms of raising awareness, breaking things down into meaningful, substantive content.
And it's not so hard. A few years ago, I was in Zambia, and I was shocked by the level of cleanliness in the streets.
Right.
A very clean country. I didn't see an area where it was stench.
You will make QA sleep nice tonight.
No, honestly, I didn't see any litter on the streets. The only other place I've been to where it was like that was in Singapore. In Singapore, when you drop a chewing gum on the street, you'll find, or you put in, they punish you for that. But Zambia is an example of how these things, they have the issues. I know there are a lot of issues with women, violence against women.
Especially in the last week, we've had people being arrested. You're right. Yeah.
So I studied the continent. I know the continent. I just in Liberia, but I know things that are happening to people. The men in Zambia are very abusive to women. They treat them very badly. That needs to stop. But it starts with leadership. How many women are there in the government in Zambia? I mean, that in influential positions.
We've gone backwards. We've got probably one of the most progressive governments we've had at the moment in terms of policy and implementation. But ironically, we've got the fewest number of women in parliament now, whereas before we were doing better. So it's really, you win some, you lose some. And unfortunately, that's where we're standing. But I would like to see more women in positions of influence and in government. In the corporate world, we've got a lot of women influencers, but it's in government where the numbers have dwindled and where the president hasn't been appointing many women.
Well, unfortunately, time is against us. It looks like it's already 8 p.m. But Brother Rodney, I thank you very much for taking your time to talk to us this evening about this book, George Weah, the Unofficial Biography of George Weah, which is going to be launched tomorrow in London. And good luck with it, and good luck with everything that you'll be doing. So, QA, a final word from you.
And yeah, a big invitation to post-Liberian elections. Would like you to come back, and then we can talk a bit more about Reporters Without Borders and everything else that you do.
Sure. So I'm so happy to be here tonight. I'm grateful to the invitation. I can assure you that I'll be back in London before the election, and at that time, Chef will be stunning. I can come and on the show and be with you two live.
Well,
Absolutely, and then
much.
you might even host it.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. So thank you very much for the time. Unfortunately, as I stated earlier, time is against us, and this was African Voices platform presented by myself and my colleague Kiwe Chihana. Do join us again next week at the same time if you've got time. Until then, you have a good night.
Thanks.